What is law? I mean, why do we have laws? Where do they come from? Is it just an arbitrary expression of whatever political party just happens to be in power at this moment? We'll talk about that next, but first, as always, we start with our mission. Today we're discussing law, eternal law, natural law, and civil law, and how it guides each of us to find the happiness that we're all striving for. If we learn this faith, if we live this faith, if we share this faith, what will the next 100 years look like? Join the mission. If you missed the previous video, this is part 5 in our series on Sister Mary O'Brien OP's great book, Christian Social Principles. You can get a copy of this book over at Sophia Press. We like this book so much, we're making a series on the first section, the first 8 chapters of this book. This video is part 5. It's on chapter 5. And in the last video, we spoke about the classical meaning of good and evil. And in this video, we're going to discuss law, what it is and why it is essential for man's pursuit of the good. Now, we make videos just like this each week. If you like this content and you want to see more videos like this, please like and subscribe. Now, Sister is going to explain that man needs law as a guide. She uses the analogy of a traveler who needs a map. So here I am in Nashville. I do actually want to go to Florida. It's getting cold here and I need some warm weather. It's not enough for me to just know my current location and my final destination. There's steps along the way to get from Nashville to Florida. Now, I could reason my way through there, but it might be very difficult and I'm probably going to make a lot of mistakes along the way and I might get lost. A map can serve as a guide that can get me from my beginning point to my final destination. And in the same way, the law exists as a means to help man get from where he is to his final destination, his final goal. Now, when she speaks about law here, this is an important distinction that we need to make at the beginning. She is not referring specifically to civil law. When we say civil law, we mean your local laws that the police enforced, or the laws that the president uses the FBI to enforce, the laws of the land. So you've got governors and princes and kings and presidents, and you've got all these leaders, and they're establishing laws to govern their land. She's using this term here at this point of the book anyways, in a more broadly way to speak about law as this guide. We spoke about the pursuit of perfection, or the pursuit of the fulfillment of our natures, the pursuit of happiness. We spoke about that in the last chapter. And so law is this she's using this term broadly as something that guides us along that pursuit. Now, she's going to define law here as nothing more than the direction of all nature as a whole, and each nature in particular, so trees and dogs and man, toward its ultimate end, the perfection of its specific being. All right, so she's going to explain that man needs law as this guide. Now, how is she's able to articulate this, to go out broadly and say that there is this movement here and man needs law? She's going to make this statement broadly. Remember, she's drawing from St. Thomas Aquinas throughout this text, and he notices that there is an order in the universe. Okay, so this is really an essential aspect of this concept of law. There is an order in the universe. The universe is not chaotic and unpredictable. Now, when I say that, I know somebody's going to immediately think, okay, there's volcanoes, they're chaotic. There's stars that go supernova, that's chaotic. We don't necessarily understand when the volcano is going to explode or when the star is going to go supernova. So there is some unpredictability in that. But in that challenge you're making, you're actually making my point. It is part of the nature of volcanoes to explode. It is part of the nature of stars to go supernova. Now, we may not understand when, where, why, or how. We may have a limited understanding of that, but that does not mean that there is not a when, why, or how to be understood, and that perhaps someday we may achieve the ability to predict exactly when a volcano is going to explode. But there is an order to volcanoes that they are dormant and then they explode. And of course, there can be a lot more detail in that. What we mean is that there is this order that exists. We don't see random occurrences. We don't see like an elephant hatching from a chicken egg, or we go to a fruit tree and we're not quite sure what fruit it's going to bear this year. Last year was apples, the year before was strawberries. Let's see, maybe this year we'll get grapes. We're not. You remember when we were kids and you go stick the quarter in the machine and you turn the thing, and you get the little bubble and you open it up and you get a piece of candy or a sticker or a piece of bubble gum or a little toy, a little ring or something. It was like a grab bag. You were always surprised. Nature's not like that. Nature has an order to how it operates. Everything in nature is ordered towards the fulfillment of its nature. Okay, so there is not this grab bag mentality that exists in nature. Even in the randomness of dice, if I roll dice, I may not know, I may not be able to understand, I may not be able to predict whether I'm going to get a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6. I may not be able to understand that. I may not be able to predict it. But I do know that I will get a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6. So even in apparent randomness, there is still an order. And maybe there's some limitation to our ability to understand it or to predict it, but there is still an order that exists and we can observe it. So the point here is that this order is a movement of every nature in creation towards its fulfillment, which is what we spoke broadly about in the previous video on the previous chapter, in chapter 4. So anyways, she's going to quote St. Thomas Aquinas, who says that law is nothing else but a dictate of practical reason emanating from the ruler who governs a perfect community. So, and so her point here there, or St. Thomas Aquinas' point, is that by looking at this order, we can see the reasoning or the in the intellect of a divine being who caused all of this order. We're gonna define that term in a minute as eternal law. Now, in a moment ago, I just mentioned, or she mentioned, that there's no chaos there's no randomness in creation. There is the exception in human moral action. That there is this order in all of creation. However, because humans have a free will, we spoke about this in the last video and I think the previous video too. Since humans have a free will and can reject the good or misapprehend the good, there's always that ability that we will err or we will choose wrongly and cause or create some disorder, some confusion, some chaos in creation. But it's in the acts of humans and in the free will of humans. So we have this governorship over our pursuit of happiness. So we can misuse it. We spoke about that a little bit more in the previous video. We can misuse it, misperceive it, misunderstand it, but ultimately we have the choice to pursue the good or to reject the good. Okay, here comes that term, eternal law. Sister explains that God, so that if we go back to that St. Thomas Aquinas quote, we can perceive that there's this order occurring, right? Well, that order is not accidental. It didn't just arise out of nowhere. There's clearly an intellect that caused that order to exist. This we call the eternal law. This eternal law is this idea in the mind of God, the plan of divine wisdom that moves everything to its final end. It's the fulfillment of its nature. So, and that there's something to be kind of reflected upon there. It's something to really meditate upon, that every nature has within it the movement towards its perfection, and it was God's design that it do so. Isn't there something beautiful about that? That we are designed, we are created in such a way that we will pursue that which will make us perfect. We're not just kind of neutral. I mean, if we were just neutral and we were just sitting here, and we might pursue perfection, or we might pursue destruction, but we're not neutral. We've got this thing in us that this desire to move towards our perfection, but who gave that to us? This intellect, this intellect had this eternally in his mind. Okay, it's also important to understand, as we go from eternal law, so this concept in the mind of God, as we go from there, we're going to start to delineate other kinds of law. We've already spoken a little bit about civil law. Every form of law has to or should be derived from and conform with the eternal law. We spoke in the last video about pro-life issues, about how from 1973 to 2022, the civil law that was instituted in this country did not conform with the eternal law. And it was kind of a manipulation or abuse of the concept of law. So, but every law must conform. It must be derived from this eternal law, or therefore it's not a just law. Now, this brings us to the concept of natural law. Now, natural law, if I tell you that natural law is when we observe everything moving towards its fulfillment, you might think, oh, okay, that sounds just like what you said about eternal law. Eternal law is the eternal concept, or the idea that God had eternally in his mind to have this order in creation. But we cannot know the true nature of God's mind. We cannot see it. We cannot perceive it. By our natures, we're limited. We have no access to that, except that we can observe around us in creation the order actually taking place. We can observe chickens laying eggs that hatch chickens. We can see that order taking place. We can observe that the fruit tree, this apple tree, bears apples and not grapes. We can observe that elephants do not come from chicken eggs. What other examples did I use in this video? But we observe that there's this order that exists. And we observe all of these natures in creation are all moving towards their fulfillment, right? So by that observation, that we call that natural law. And by knowing natural law, we understand that natural law is the manifestation or the existence in creation of the order that is eternally in the mind of God. Now, in the next video, we'll take a further look at this concept. We'll go a little deeper to discuss natural moral law and how it guides human behavior. And you can watch that video by clicking right here. When it comes to morality, you know, like right and wrong, tell me what you think. You hear people say all the time, I've got to follow my conscience. What does that mean? Does that mean that there's an objective moral norm that we can perceive in nature? Or is that just an excuse to do whatever I feel like doing?